All right. Tagi Tuma Soketa for joining me today for this special podcast. We got a very exciting story when we talk about him. But before that, we got him to follow guest today, where you have introduced him first time. First and foremost, of course, we welcome the leader of opposition and member of parliament for Auke and Langalanga, and for the Solomon Island Democratic Party, Honorable Wale. Thank you much. And then on the brother Blimi Lohia is coming in all the way from the Netherlands. He's the international spokesperson for Free West Papua and for the United Liberated Movement for West Papua Ministry of Environment, the Green State Vision, Mr. Raki Ap. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So audience would be today's topic, and one interesting topic that we talk about today. It's about why is West Papua's full membership to the Melanesian Spearhead Group is so important. So we will unpack this more with the discussion with me today. But before you miss a start, maybe you me a little bit talk more about him, Raki, as he is new to our lands. It's the first time you're here in Melanesia, yeah, altogether.
First time in Melanesia. Yeah. I feel very, very home.
Yeah. Thank you, Raki. Yeah, we're very happy to have you here as well. But could you explain us a little bit more about your background, so our audience a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So my origin lies, of course, in West Papua. I'm the younger son of the by Indonesian military assassinated anthropologist, the famous musician Arnold Ap. So 4 months before I was born, Indonesian military assassinated my father, Arnold Ap. I was still in my mom's belly at the time, and then my mother and 3 brothers and me and my mom's belly fled to the neighboring Papua New Guinea, where I was born in a refugee camp. And then, due to circumstances, we fled to the Netherlands, where I basically grew up as a Dutch citizen, but obviously not forgetting, how I lost my father and what is still happening to a lot of West Papuans up to this day. And that's how I become vocal for the people of West Papua and contributed to the Free West Papua campaign after the launch by independence leader Benny Wenda. And nowadays I'm acting as the international spokesperson to educate people in the world, but also in the Netherlands as former colonizer of West Papua, about the ongoing genocide and ecocide there, ongoing colonization. It brought me to a lot of places in the world, giving guest lectures, and I'm really, really happy that I can be here in Solomon Islands to meet the Wantoks and to share the same story about injustice in the region here.
It's very impressive. Your journey is one of tragic, but also very inspirational for many people out there who are struggling for numerous causes, and of course, the indigenous perspective is also quite important. Just to give a little bit more context to the discussions here, perhaps the audience would like to know more about what is West Papua, where is this place, and why is West Papua is becoming a topic that is circulating around the region these days, and I believe internationally as well.
Yes, good question. Let us start at the location, right? West Papua is the western half of the island of New Guinea. Most in the region should know where it is. It's Papua New Guinea, is the independent state of Papua New Guinea, and the western half was in the past part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, on the colonies of Europe. After the independence of Indonesia, the Netherlands basically prepared West Papua towards independence, and they got the first government, a military force. But due to huge pressure from the United States and the geopolitics at the time, the Netherlands was forced to hand over West Papua to the Indonesia we know today. So even there was a referendum where the West Papuans didn't have the equal way to vote. So we lost our right to self-determination and become part of Indonesia. So it's the western half of the island of New Guinea. But clearly you see this straight invisible line between the independent state of Papua New Guinea and West Papua as part of Indonesia. Orientation for the people, it's right above Australia and part of the island of New Guinea.
Amazing. And I noticed that there's a lot of advocacy on the international and regional stage about West Papua, but I can also see that there's to the political level, there's an organization that's been pushing for this. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So since the integration to Indonesia against the will of the indigenous West Papuans. Much later, in July 1st, 1971, the proclamation by the independence movement was launched. And after that time, we got several groups of independence movement in West Papua. And after these years of, campaigning around the world, they didn't succeed until Vanuatu noticed it, and in 2014 said, your people the liberation movement people has to unite, so you can become more effective, and we can support you. So that's what happened in 2014 under the leadership of the government of Vanuatu. The birth of the United Liberation Movement for West Papua was there, and this is like an umbrella organization for the three largest independent movements for West Papua. And since then, we're trying to get more momentum in the region, and that's how the United Liberation Movement became a year later in 2015 observer member. So that's basically a recognition by the Melanesian states that the people of West Papua are a people, are a nation, and but we are hoping for more, of course, and that's why I'm here in the region as well.
Thank you for that. And you touch on the next question that we'll be talking more about is the Melanesian Spearhead Group.
Yes.
And you mentioned that the organization, the United Liberated Movement West Papua, is part of it. But perhaps we can turn to Honorable Leader now about if he could share his insight about what is the Melanesian Spearhead Group.
Well, I suppose the name ought to be self-explanatory. The spearhead, this fella Eslo Medule, the spearhead, unfortunately, that spearhead is probably not a head at the moment, it's a blunt tail maybe, but at its formation, the Melanesian Spearhead Group was a grouping of Melanesian states to work hard at all levels and international fora for the decolonization of Melanesian peoples who seek self-determination. Now, leaders back then accepted that perhaps some Melanesian peoples may not want to be independent. Now I hear that part of the propaganda from Indonesia is that there are more Melanesians in Indonesia than all of Melanesia combined outside of West Papua. Okay, if we grant that, the question still remains that for West Papua, they want, their expressed will to be given an opportunity in some kind of a referendum. So that's what Melanesian Spearhead Group was formed to do. And that's why, of course, the New Caledonians, the FLNKS, is a full member. It's not a state, but it is a member that's working for decolonization from French rule. So it is really hypocritical in the current situation that Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, and until Rambuka came along, Fiji, were making it very difficult for the West Papuans to become full members. So we hope that this will be the opportunity. And there are, the MSG, Melanesian Spearhead Group, has grown beyond just fighting for decolonization of Melanesian peoples. It's now a trade bloc. It's a sub-regional, political bloc also. And there are aspects of it that deals with other issues, cooperation and security and transnational crime and issues like that. But I think all those things are important, but it mustn't overwhelm or remove this original purpose for which it was formed, because the need still exists. The people of West Papua are still denied an opportunity to express themselves freely, whether they want to govern themselves, take control of their own destiny. It's not for us in the rest of Melanesia to say, give them independence, make them independent. What we are saying is, give them the opportunity to declare whether they want to remain part of Indonesia or they want to become independent. That's a decision for West Papuans, and what we must work for and towards is that they're given that opportunity. And as Raki said rightly, America is complicit in this mess. And recently I read Henry Kissinger, because I think he was the National Security Advisor or Secretary of State at the time, turned 100 years old. Well, this is one of Kissinger's terrible legacies. The geopolitics was his calculation. It just recently came out in the US, archival records that were declassified, the trade that was done with Indonesia so Indonesia could remain within the US orbit and away from the communists. So, and now of course geopolitics has become a big issue again. So our challenge as the MSG is to admit the West Papuans and to work with the US and the UN, and because now is our opportunity. The geopolitics provides challenges but also opportunities, and we must work out strategically how to use those. So much work remains to be done, of course.
Thank you for that, Honorable Leader. It's quite shocking to see that it's 2023 now, but we still have colonization in its purest form still in the Pacific region. But just coming back to the topic of Raki mentioned observer, Honorable Leader, you mentioned member. So I'm going to the membership composition of the MSG. At the composition right now, there are 5 full members, which is Vanuatu, Solomon Island, Papua New Guinea, and the Kanak and Socialist National Liberation Front of FLNKS, and then finally Fiji. But then we also have associate members, which is Indonesia, and then we have 2 observers, which is East Timor and West Papua. It's to a layperson, it comes quite complex. Are they all members? Are they have affiliates? What is the difference between an observer per se and a full member? What rights do they have?
Well, we know why Indonesia is an associate member. It's there to influence for its own national interests. And we know that Indonesian national interest is against our own Melanesian brothers and sisters in West Papua. And so therefore on that, I am opposed to having Indonesia in any form whatsoever in the MSG, as long as they continue to pursue a policy that tramples on the legitimate rights, sovereign rights of West Papuans. They should not be entertained by the Melanesian countries at all. So they should never have been admitted even as an associate member. And in that, the MSG was founded principally to pursue decolonization of Melanesian peoples, and as evidenced by the admission as full member of the FLNKS, well, the same should be accorded to the United Liberation Movement of West Papua. So they should be full members. There's no argument. I don't think even Papua New Guinea and Solomons, who are holding back at the moment, argue with that. Their arguments are really just terrible excuses. The difference in those membership classes really come down to voting rights and who is represented at the Leaders Summit. So the full members have voting rights on any issues, but they don't vote. They never have voted, much like the Pacific Island Forum, MSG operates on consensus. But as you know, Solo, consensus is an excuse for doing nothing, for not taking tough decisions. So I have been privately encouraging, certain leaders in the Vanuatu government, they're chairing, because this matter is so important and is so critically linked to the founding principle of the MSG, that this matter be put to a vote. Because now Fiji is supportive, FLNKS, of course, is supportive, and Vanuatu that's a majority. You don't need Solomons and PNG. If they want to have their excuses, have it, eat it, drink it. If you don't want to be a voice for the West Papuans, continue to do so. Let's put this to a vote. Let's not continue this nonsense, this excuse of we operate out of consensus. No, it's just nonsense. Really, it is nonsense. So the MSG needs to grow up in the way that it conducts itself. Solomon Islands, of course, accepted the futsal stadium. I keep calling it the 30 pieces of silver. It's Judas's price to be silenced. And I think the Prime Minister is now playing that game. He was very strongly pro-West Papua. Now he's finding all sorts of excuses because of a futsal stadium, It's a terrible... I am really ashamed that Solomons is such a fickle, supporter. One day support, another day cold, one day hot, another day ice cold. It's not a good situation to be. And perhaps, part of the advocacy too, Prime Minister maybe is only reacts to public sentiment in the Solomons. So part of your work, my work, and others who share the same beliefs and support for West Papua is to advocate more and to get the public engaged more. And that too may force the Prime Minister to be more engaged and supportive. He was supportive, but it now seems to me only because it was politically gainful for him. When it is not so gainful, he grows cold. And backslide to you. So, there's much work to be done there.
Thank you so much for those insights. It's quite fascinating to see how behind the scenes work of MSG and the political power dynamics within the region on this end. But just coming back again to the question, which is, and from your perspective, Raki, could you explain a little bit more why is the ULMWP having much influence in the region because of the status? What is the observer status have been doing them in there?
That's a good question. First of all, I want to thank Honorable Leader for the comments which I underline fully. And then jumping into your question, I think as observer member, it's a recognition of that we as people existed. So we welcomed that adoption of the status, but it keeps us powerless in tabling important topics related to issues that are happening in West Papua, which Indonesia is not bringing in. For example, the militarization of the area, the internally displaced people, more than 100,000 women, children, elderly. These issues should be tabled. And if we had the full membership, we could bring this in. Imagine if, 1/3 of the people in Solomon Islands would have been killed. Would the leaders be tabling this? Of course they will. And this is the voiceless, powerless situation that we are in for much too long. And that's why we encourage the Melanesian leaders to understand, look, there's a lot we shouldn't learn from Europe. But in these days, how Europe is in solidarity for the people in Ukraine, we can't say the same for the Melanesian leaders, for the situation in West Papua. So I would say to them, some of them are even chanting at the UN about the horrible war in Ukraine. Well, we got our own war right here in the region. It's West Papua. And full membership will help us to table very important issues happening in West Papua in the darkness that Indonesians keep West Papua media out. So that's why, observer member is there. We got some information, but we got not the power to table issues that we desperately need leaders to talk about.
Thank you so much, Raki. And that really helps us go to finally to the question, which I believe Honorable Leader and Raki have touched on it, but perhaps we can add on to that in answering the question, why is West Papua's full membership is so important, not just to West Papuans, but to the region, the sub-region of Melanesia, but also the Pacific region, and I believe the international community. Has a question for both of you to contribute, if you would like.
I would ask not only the Melanesian leaders, but especially the people to see the potential of an independent state of West Papua. We're the richest province of Indonesia. It's not Indonesia paying this futsal stadium in Solomon. They should pay because it's the money of the people of West Papua. It's our bones, the blood of our ancestors. And the Solomon Islanders deserve it. But there's even much more than that. An independent state for West Papua means that the entire Pacific region could get rid of the aid by Australia, US, or whatever foreign state. And in our Green State vision, we are reaching out to the Pacific family to see an independent state of West Papua in the interest, because the resources is not for us alone, it's for the entire region. In the middle of a climate and biodiversity crisis, the region must understand that West Papua, together with Papua New Guinea, is the world's largest tropical island, the third largest rainforest. The ecocide which is happening there should be in the interest of every climate justice activist, of every leader who stand of fighting against climate change, must understand that deforestation committed by Indonesia is directly threatening the climate crisis, but also the sea level rising, which is threatening the Pacific region. So I hope the leaders will look further than these 4 terms and the economic relation in the short term, because in the long term they will pay the highest price for the people of the islands. So therefore, the urgency for them is to wake up and to see what is happening in West Papua and how it's threatening not only the West Papuans now at the moment, but the entire region and the world in the long term.
Thank you, Raki.
Some years ago, of course, Solomon Islands was a sponsor of a motion, resolution at the UN level to include in the list for decolonization French Polynesia. And of course it's important because of course they're in the region. Now of course West Papua is Melanesian, French Polynesia is Polynesian. Not that we want to discriminate, but there ought to be some impetus when we're talking about our own people, Melanesians, that are under the yoke of oppression, of Indonesian oppression, that Solomon Islands should be leading. Solomon should be sponsoring a similar resolution to put West Papua on the decolonization list. Of course, Solomons is not doing that. So it is important, if we're not speaking for West Papua, we should at least allow them full membership. Let them speak for themselves. If we're not speaking for them and then we deprive them of the platform to speak, then really we become complicit in the Indonesian suppression of their voice. So it is a moral argument, regardless of what the rest of the region could gain from West Papuan independence. Just on the moral front alone, we have an obligation to our people. It is not just that, all right, they're living a good life under Indonesian rule, so, whether they're independent or not, that's been the argument in French Polynesia. The Tahitians are saying, well, we're better than you Solomons. And it's true. You've been to Tahiti, it's beautiful. I met some Tahitians in Vanuatu who wants to be independent. Oh, fair enough. But this is not the situation in West Papua. The French, apart from all the nonsense they did with the nuclear testing and so forth, have generally been quite humane in the way they've allowed French Polynesians to determine their own affairs at the local level. That's not the situation with Indonesian rule in West Papua. They've plundered resources, they've violated human rights, they've killed so many people, and anybody putting up the flag gets arrested for treason. It's just all nonsense. The things they wouldn't do to their own Javanese, they're doing to our Melanesians. And that cannot be left aside. We've got to call for accountability. And part of that accountability is let the people of West Papua, the indigenous Melanesians, vote on this matter. Do they want to continue? You've been such a great colonizer that they may want to remain with you. But give them the opportunity to say so. If you're denying them, why are you denying them? Are you scared they might vote otherwise? And why are you surprised they might vote otherwise? Have you not been such a good colonizer? And in this day and age, of course, we read stories about Xinjiang in West China. And Chinese will not be happy with me saying this, but Australia in particular, but Australia and the Western world have described what's happened there as genocide. And I'm meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia tomorrow. Actually, I'm seeing him tonight for a function, but tomorrow formally. And I am going to be raising the issue of West Papua because on West Papua, right at Australia's border, Australia's been silent. I've raised this once before at the highest levels. And they said, yes, we are engaging, confidentially. Well, obviously it's not working. Accountability requires transparency. So if Australia makes its own calculation that Indonesia is strategic because it's close, right next door, and big population, big military, and therefore, again, West Papua is a, sacrifice on the altar, that's a moral issue for us. This is why it's important that they have full membership at the MSG level, so they can advocate at that platform for themselves, because we're not doing such a great job. But Australia and New Zealand have a responsibility, a moral, if not also a legal responsibility, because of the atrocities happening right at their doorstep. Why are they so concerned about Xinjiang and not concerned about, what's happening right under their nose? It's an issue I'm going to be raising with the Deputy Prime Minister tomorrow, but it's an issue equally for Prime Minister Sogavare and Prime Minister Marape. They were both at some stage strong supporters of West Papua, but they're now backsliders. They're looking for excuses. So it's time we remind them.
Oh, it's very. Looking back in the mirror, it's a huge responsibility, but of course, it's a responsibility that must be carried by Melanesians to support other Melanesians in the region as well. Thank you for your insight on that, man. But perhaps we can go for a last round of questioning. Last round of feedback on this. Does anyone of the both would like to add on anything, final say on the answering the question? I think we have done much, but I'm sure there's one or two more left. No?
I would like to say to the public of Solomon Islands, right across the whole country, that we do not lose sight. We're not ourselves, very capable of being good advocates and supporters of the West Papua cause. We must stand up, write to an MP when you're going to ask for an RCDF project, raise the West Papua issue, so that some pressure is brought to bear on our Prime Minister, so that he knows that the rest of the country cares about the issues in West Papua. We're not just talking about political issues. Of course, political issues are at the epitome of it, at the top of it, at the peak of it, because political rights are what we're fighting for. But part of the reason we're fighting for it is the West Papua people themselves are living in fear for their lives. So at the absolute basic minimum, there's the human rights situation. Some basic rights that we take for granted here simply do not exist for our brothers and sisters in West Papua. So it is in everybody's interest, not just for the Prime Minister and Cabinet and political leaders, but for all Solomon Island citizens to take an active interest and to raise these matters with their leaders, and to, hopefully be part of forcing or influencing change in the Prime Minister's attitude. It can be done. One sensitive law public pressure. So I would encourage our people to do that, but also the pressure committee here to work harder and more creatively also in support of Raki and President Benny and others who have, come through here advocating on these issues. UMI must stand strong.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Big fella tagi tumas, Honorable Leader and Raki, and for this great conversation we're having today. Now we're coming to an end, and just like to recap that in Melanesia and even in the 21st century, colonization still persists today, and the Melanesia still are in the dark with widespread human rights abuse and injustices rampant throughout the sub-region. And then at this time is where precisely why the Melanesian Spearhead Group leadership as a region needs to come together, to work together to address this really critical issue.